from the left ventricle of the heart, and it's actually been researched under leading pathologists in New Zealand to actually be throbbing and living as it was in his laboratory for the 30 days.
Okay. The problem with miracle stories are that they truly are a dime a dozen. I mean, the miracle stories that cash out Christianity are miracle stories set in the context of the pre-scientific context of the first century Roman Empire, attested to by copies of ancient Greek manuscripts that have thousands of discrepancies. Now, there are miracle stories that you can find in India today, attested to by living eyewitnesses. So you look at the people surrounding someone like Satya Sai Baba. Thousands of Western-educated people go to India, spend time with Satya Sai Baba, and come away claiming that he's performed a variety of miracles. And in fact, if you add up all those stories, every miracle attributed to Jesus, including the resurrection of the dead, is attributed to Satya Sai Baba. And millions of people think he's a living God. These stories, from our point of view, don't even merit an hour on the Discovery Channel. Okay? And yet, 2.3 billion people think that the miracles of Jesus are worth organizing your life around. And that I think, is an intellectually unsustainable disparity. Now, I'm not closed to the evidence of miracles, and it would be trivially easy for God to convince me of his existence, or the powers of psychic powers of saints, or whatever it is. I mean, if you can tell, I've got a 20-digit number written on a piece of paper in my wallet.
I'm not God, sir. I'm sorry.
Okay. But if you tell me what that number is, then we have a very interesting miracle on our hands.
And I still don't...
I can't let the follow-ups continue. Sorry. We have a whole bunch of people lined up. Yes, over here.
Dr. Craig, I know you wanted to kind of stay away from the epistemological questions, but I need some advice. Because accepting an objective good, I guess, where do we go from that practically? Because something happened to me last night where, I've been a Christian, but last night God appeared to me and he told me that homosexual lovemaking was every bit as beautiful and loving and good as heterosexual procreative sex in the system of marriage. And he said, come and let everyone know that. I said, no, God, they won't believe me. They will not believe me. How do I? Where do we go from here practically with divine revelation? Do I leave my church and follow?
Your feigned sincerity about this, isn't fooling anybody. It's not the topic of tonight's debate. I'm not even going to address a silly question like this.
I didn't mean to offend you. I'm serious.
Sorry, we aren't doing follow-ups with the question. I allowed the one up there because there was a misunderstanding, but the question has come out. It's received an answer.
So this question is for Dr. Harris. Unfortunately, mine won't be as funny. Okay, so it seems to me that there's a distinction in your argument that I'd like you to discuss, which is the conceptual possibility of the most miserable world and its material possibility. So basically what I'm asking is whether you can cite any evidence to believe that this is not the world that is most miserable, or otherwise. So if you can't, let's assume this is the world with the material conditions for the most misery to exist. Then wouldn't it be moral to destroy it all, destroy all consciousness? So I'm just wondering, how would you distinguish that this is not the worst possible world?
Well, it may be the only world with conscious life. I mean, I doubt that given the trillion-fold universe we're living in, but we don't have any evidence of life elsewhere, much less conscious life. But so your question cuts to the issue of, what if it's all about well-being? Well, why don't we just, kill all the unhappy people in their sleep tonight? Okay, wouldn't that raise sort of the aggregate level of well-being on Earth? And there are infinite number of thought experiments like that you can come up with that seem to push on this concern. Well, if it's just about suffering, well, you can just eradicate it painlessly for people, and you have increased the net well-being. But all of those thought experiments neglect all of the cascading effects of living in a world in which we do that sort of thing, where the consequences of doing that. So why don't we, in the classic experiment that everyone trots out is, what if you're a doctor and you realize that you have somebody who could benefit from the organs of, you have 5 people who could benefit from the organs of one person who's sitting in your waiting room. So you go into your waiting room, you knock him out, and you euthanize him, you vivisect him, and you give away his organs. Okay, that seems like it's a net benefit to 5 people. Okay, but if we were all living in a world where at any moment your doctor could vivisect you and steal your organs, that would have rather obvious, ghastly consequences that none of us would want to submit to. And our intuitions about the sanctity of human life, caring for people, treating people as ends in themselves rather than means to some other end, all of that conserves intuitions we have about trust and its importance in life, and all of these ways in which we are knit together as a community, and ways in which we only rise or fall together. I mean, so it's in a very important sense, our happiness is dependent upon the happiness of others. I mean, we are not atomized selves that are radically separate. So this idea that killing everyone, I mean, first of all, killing everyone would eradicate all the suffering, yes, but it would also foreclose all the happiness. I mean, it would nullify every possibility of experience. So if you think that a universe where the lights are on is better than a universe where the lights are off, then turning the lights off is worse. But I could imagine a universe which it would be worth turning the lights off in. I mean, the Christian hell is one of them. You'd be doing people a lot of good.
Whether you know
sorry, no follow-ups. I'm going to be really strict about this.
Answering the question.
Well, to answer your question, if this is the only world, well, then it is by definition both the most miserable and the happiest, and everything in between. And now I just have no idea what else is out there.
Up on my right.
Dr. Craig, when discussing Islam, and more specifically the Taliban, you said that they have the wrong God, citing, I assume, their violent attacks based on jihad. And because of that, how do you know that you have the right God? And if you do have the right God, what explanation can you offer for him authorizing the Crusades?
Again, this isn't the topic of the debate tonight, but let me just say that one of the side areas that I specialized in my theological studies in Germany is Islam, and I'm persuaded that there are better reasons for believing that God has revealed himself decisively in Jesus of Nazareth by raising him from the dead after his crucifixion, whereas Islam is committed not only to the fact that Jesus wasn't raised from the dead, but that he was not even crucified, which is the one historical fact about Jesus of Nazareth that is universally acknowledged by New Testament critics across the spectrum. And so, with all the best will in the world, I could not be a Muslim. I see a lot of points of commonality. I applaud the monotheism of Islam, but in the end, I think that the Muslim faith gets it wrong about Jesus.
So, Dr. Harris, I think that you've posed some interesting challenges to Christianity and to theism in general, but I want to return to the issue of debate, which is the objectivity of morality. And so, you say that you can base objective morality on the assumption that that this worst possible world is bad. So I think that we can all agree on that statement, that it is bad, but what's to say that that's not simply just a subjective assertion, that it's just something based on human opinion? I don't see any reason to think that that's an objective.
Right. Well, I tried to show you in my opening remarks why that particular concern is not interesting or necessary. You can play that same game with everything that we think is objective. So why does 2 + 2 make 4? It seems to make forward to us, but how do we know that's not just a human intuition? I mean, what is wrong with a logical argument that contradicts itself? Why is self-contradiction not a good way to argue? Well, it just doesn't seem to fly. Now, you could always try to get behind that as an epistemological skeptic or a logical skeptic and say, well, this is just how you monkeys are wired to think. And there are interesting ways in which science at its forefront does create some of that tension. There are ways in which our logical expectations begin to break down in physics, but we use other scientific intuitions, and in this case mathematical intuitions, to try to get behind them. You have to pick yourself up by your bootstraps somewhere. Okay? It's better than pulling yourself down by them. And so you have to every objective paradigm has to make a first move. It has to step into the light based on some axiomatic judgment that is not self-justifying. Gödel proved this in logic, and if this is true for arithmetic, it's true for things far more complicated than arithmetic. I'm saying that a recognition that this universe offers a spectrum of experience, on the one hand truly intolerable and on the other sublimely wonderful, and that we all know that movement across this spectrum toward the sublime is better than movement toward the unendurable and pointless suffering. Now, that's, again, you might ask, well, what about suffering that actually turns out to be good in the end? What about the suffering of, the stress of learning to play a musical instrument or whatever? Again, that's not a counter. I mean, there are ways to climb. We might have to go down a little bit to go up to a higher place on this landscape, and that we can make sense of that kind of struggle. And so I'm not equating the good with mere pleasure in a way that Dr. Craig suggested.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Dr. Craig, in your refutation of Mr. Harris, you rely very heavily on the distinction between is statements and ought statements, where you could take the entire collection of known is statements and never be able to logically derive an ought statement. So I have one question for you. Is the statement, God exists, an is statement or an ought statement?
That's an is statement.
So you can't derive any moral, objective duties from it?
Not from that alone.
Then you have unstated premises in your argument.
Well, no, I stated them clearly. I said that they're based in God's commandments, and that moral obligations and duties arise in response to imperatives issued by a competent authority. And so I would see that our moral duties are grounded in the imperatives issued by the good itself.
Can I actually just add one piece there? Because I want to bring back this notion of psychopathy, because it now strikes me as even more relevant than I thought. So this idea that morality comes merely from the mere issuance of a competent authority. One of the features of psychopathy is an inability to distinguish true moral precepts that relate to the well-being of people and things that merely issue from a competent authority. So if you ask children sitting in a classroom, is it okay to drink a soda in class if the teacher gives you permission? Most of them will say yes. If you ask them, is it okay to punch your neighbor in the face if the teacher gives you permission? They immediately recognize the distinction between a moral infraction and a mere conventional rule. And this is very young children. But children at risk for psychopathy don't. Children at risk for psychopathy think that rules are just given by an authority. So if the teacher tells you you can punch a child in the face, you can punch a child in the face. This is, again, I'm not accusing religious people in general of being psychopaths, but there's a psychopathic core to this moral worldview. This divine command theory that Dr. Craig is advocating suggests that if God only tells you to sacrifice your firstborn son, it is good to do it. That's where goodness comes from. And so you've got people waking up in trailer parks all over America suffering some form of mental illness that's destabilized them and made them vulnerable to this way of thinking. And there are people who kill their children thinking they're Abraham, who just didn't get interrupted by an angel.